What I do is inconsequential. Why I do what I do is I get to shorten people's journeys every day. What I love about our hospitality industry is that it's our mission to make people feel cared for while on their journeys. Together, we'll explore what hospitality means in the built environment, in business, and in our daily lives. I'm Dan Ryan, and this is Defining Hospitality. An award-winning architect, developer, and hospitality designer, owner of KKAD, Pocono Modern, and Westmore Hotels and Restaurants, which includes Pren Kitchen. Also, a passionate musician, a dear friend, and an inspiration to me as a fellow entrepreneur, Kraig Kalashian. Welcome, Kraig.
Wow. Thanks, Dan. That's a very nice intro.
Well, it's a very true intro, because one of the things that I've always loved about you and continue to love about you is you're a true entrepreneur. You're always doing so many things, from opening a restaurant in the midst of a pandemic to having a really successful hotel design company, also doing real estate development, and you're in everything. And then just all of how your outlook on life in general is just, I don't know, I just love sharing those ideas with you. So, like, have you always had that many hats on?
Yeah, well, thanks for that. And, obviously I feel you're obviously a kindred spirit in a lot of those things. And we've talked about that at length. But I think for me, from a very early age, I had more of an academic approach to everything. I spent a lot of time reading when I was a kid and definitely pursued things more from the philosophical side. And so for me, people use the word entrepreneurship, but for me, entrepreneurship is not necessarily about, how to make money, but more about how to solve problems. And that's why I ultimately got into architecture, because I view architecture as a profession where, it's really about solving problems and being given a problem and figuring out how to spatially resolve it. And so I've always enjoyed problem solving. And so my big problem or challenge, I should say, is when I see something that's not right, I always feel like, yeah, I could do that. I could do that better, and it's a bit of a curse actually, because, the town that I live in, for example, it doesn't really have great food. And so everybody was talking about, I wish somebody would open a restaurant that does it, and so we were like, I could do that, and so I get in trouble a lot by just wanting to be a problem solver and fix things. And it's not usually about figuring out how to make money, even though, that's a part of it. It's usually about thinking you could do something better and wanting to show people, lead by example, and do something better that way. But I always think about it a lot before I do anything, which is, I think, a good thing and a bad thing. A lot of people kind of act and just know what to do. And I always have to spend more time thinking about it. So I would say it comes from an academic place, but also from this curse of wanting to solve problems all the time.
And I want to get into that a little bit, because, one of the challenges that we all have in this new world and the old world and just life in general is focus. And we're all given the same amount of time in a 24-hour period. But one of the things I like to do at the beginning of this is, obviously the title is Defining Hospitality. And I
Right.
want to use this as a thread and a tool to kind of dig into the conversation. But
Sure.
given all the different initiatives that you have, how do you define hospitality?
I mean, for me, hospitality is a feeling. It's the feeling like somebody's taking care of you. It's the feeling like somebody sees who you are and what you need, and gives you that. For me, the best way that I could define it is just this feeling I used to get from going to my grandmother's house when I was a kid. So if you asked me what's hospitality, I would say it's the way my grandmother treated me when I was a kid. Like when I would go to my grandmother's house, she would just basically give me 100% of her time and attention while I was there. She would always have things that were special for me. It was really like this feeling of being treated, in the best way, like you would imagine royalty gets treated, and somebody stopping whatever they're doing to just make you feel at home or accommodated, or, just pay attention to what you need. And so I think that for me, the idea of hospitality is just thinking about other people and how to make them feel seen and how to make them feel taken care of. And, that's ultimately what most of these things that I do are about, whether it's, writing music or serving food or designing, a guest room, it's really about thinking about those things that, make somebody's day a little better or make them not have to worry about something. And so that's kind of where it all stems from for me.
And I remember in one of our conversations, you were designing a menu for, I don't remember if it was the restaurant or one of your properties, but it had to do with you. There were these great recipes. I don't remember exactly what they were, but I remember salivating as you were telling me. And you said something that maybe is making me think about it when you talk about your grandmother, but you said the most important ingredient is time.
Yeah. Yeah. Time is always an ingredient. And, I think today, like a lot of what I see happening is people tend to try and make things sound complex or fancy. And there seems like there's 100 million ways to describe every simple little thing. But really the most valuable thing that you can give anybody is your time, right? Because we don't know how much we have and it's a limited resource, right? It's not unlimited. So, in cooking, I think it was Dominique Ansel, the guy who invented the Cronut, who has that coin that is his phrase, time is an ingredient. But it really is true. The best things I find in life are not the instant gratification things. They're the things that often take a while to, materialize or come to be. And I can tell you whenever I've done things personally, whether it's opening a restaurant or working on a hotel deal or building a house, it's never one of these like things that happens quickly. It happens over years and years. And so like when we build houses in the Poconos, a normal home developer would build a house in 6 months. It takes us like 2.5 years because we fuss over every little detail. And again, we're not doing it as the prime motivation is financial. We're doing it as like, this is a reflection of who we are and what we believe. And so it's always challenging when we work for clients who are, saying like, oh, this has to be done in 6 months or, and as you pointed out, the current climate in the world is such that, we're all at the mercy of a lot of different factors. So, but again, that goes back to problem solving. But I do believe that, taking the appropriate amount of time to either solve a problem or even just think about another little detail that somebody else might overlook is a differentiating factor in kind of how we approach things. And I'll give you a quick example. I recently stayed at a hotel where, it wasn't easily apparent like how to change the shower from like the tub setting to the shower setting. It was like some fancy faucet where there wasn't like a button that you push that diverts the water. And, I'm like standing there, for a few minutes, like, how do you switch this? How do you switch this? And so that something little like that we think about, how do we make it easy and legible for a guest to understand how to do that? Or, and that something like that, if somebody's kind of on the edge, can kind of ruin their day. You know what I mean? Like they're in a rush and they're trying to take a shower and they can't figure out how to do it. So, but just taking the time to ideate through a problem and think about everything that could go wrong. For me, that's essential to trying to do something well, because when I was starting out, somebody once told me, like, if you don't have time to do it right the first time, where are you going to find the time to have to do it again? It's wrong. And I've always remembered that because, yeah, it might take a little longer to kind of think about it and think through it and get it right or get the right product or get the right thing. But you never have to touch it again after that because it's correct. And so it's the same in cooking or in anything else. If the foundation of what you're doing is well thought out and correct, you never have to guess if the finished thing, is correct because all of the foundational elements. So in cooking, let's say, you have prep and then you have execution in a restaurant. So if you're using a sauce, for example, that's been prepped by a prep cook in the finished dish, if the sauce you're using has been made incorrectly, the finished dish is never going to be correct. So it's absolutely essential that the sauce or, the base ingredient be done correctly. And so if you spend the amount of time on those foundational elements, then all the line cook has to do, or the chef or whatever has to do, is just grab the sauce, heat it up and put it on the dish. But if you have to taste it every time because it's under salted or under seasoned or it's missing an ingredient or it's too much wine in it or whatever, it's really going to slow you up when you're trying to execute a lot of dinners at once. So, I really do believe that time is an ingredient, and in food, especially if you've eaten anything that's just makes your heart sing, it's definitely something that was cooked for a really long time, or maybe it's a baked dish that has to rise for so many hours. It's like, you can't make great bread in 20 minutes. It's a process, and it uses nature too. And I do believe nature, shows us that like, the leaves don't change overnight. It takes months and months, so all the best things and most beautiful things, they don't happen instantly. They take time. So that is a big part of my philosophy about, giving things its due. And that includes like thinking about, other people, and how, how are we going to service and accommodate those people in an environment that's going to make them feel amazing. And,
Yeah,
these
and
are all interesting discussions.
I want to get into the different types of people, because we're going to do that in a second. But as you were talking about the tub to the shower,
Yeah.
Recently I was at the Independent Lodging Congress event in Brooklyn, and David Rockwell was up there talking about guest rooms in particular, and how they're such, what's that?
And robots.
And robots. But well, the robot thing is a little freaky to me, and I haven't really gotten that all the way through my head yet. But on the guest room part, what was interesting, he said the guest room is like the ultimate laboratory to work through a lot of those issues, because if a guest can't figure out how to, like you said, turn on the shower or make the shower go to a tub, and it's confusing, or he was using the example of just light switches, especially as rooms get so complicated, it's really important to make that work, but also in a way to kind of figure it out for, I always say, like the lowest common denominator. You just have to have someone who's not technically savvy that's going in there, and how can everything just be intuitive to get it to work?
Sure. And I think the key to that is communication, because, the other thing that's never really factored in is that, our world is always changing from a technological standpoint, from ecological standpoint. Our resources are always changing. And so, for example, take climate setting, for example, how cold a lot of properties leave their rooms all at the same temperature. You walk in the room, it's 68 degrees, in a warm climate, and you walk in and you're freezing. And you're like, why do they have this temperature set to this? All you really have to do, when you book the hotel or when you check in or what have you, is, somebody just has to ask, like, what's your preferred room setting? And, there's technology to accommodate that, and say, okay, we could set the room to your preferred setting. And that's just a small example. Different people like different light preferences. Everybody has a different preference for everything. And that's one of the things that phones have proliferated, is that if I look at your phone or you look at my phone, they're going to be set up completely differently. What apps are on the home screen, and where you have your buttons, and the colors of your background, and that's just a small example of how we all live our lives. We all have different preferences, and we've proliferated those preferences. And so really, I think hospitality is just about communicating, or being able to communicate those preferences. And I always remember Danny Meyer, his golden rule is not, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's do unto others as they would want done to them. So it's not, if I like it, you'll like it. It's like, no, I have to ask you what you'll like, and then try and give you that. And I think that that's a really important element about just living today, because you can't make assumptions that if I like something, you'll like something, or if I want it this way, you want it this way. We've all gotten really good at identifying the things that we do like and the things that we want by our preferences. And I know AI is a big, that's a big driver in AI, is like recording what everybody likes and recording what everybody buys and recording, and then showing you these other things that they think you'll like and buy. But when it comes to people, I think we all have to get better at saying, I don't know what you like, so why don't you just tell me what you like, or how do you like it like this? Like, it's a good thing to ask questions, and I think it's a good thing to say, I don't know. It ranges from a million topics, that we're dealing with in society today. But I think the key to it, especially when it comes to guest room design, a lot of times we're in a room with our client, who's the operator or the manager, and we're designing to their preferences, but I'm constantly trying to remind them, well, you're not the guest, right? You're the owner. And you might be a 58-year-old person who only goes to these types of places, but your guest is going to be, a 28-year-old, global traveler who, might want to bring their dog with them, or say, there's so many different profiles of people that travel. you really can't make decisions in a vacuum of just who the client or owner likes. And so when I say to them, I said, I understand you like that, but that's not who we're designing for. Like you're not the guest. And what is the guest going to like? And so a lot of times you have to think about that as well, and be sensitive to that. And those are great discussions too, because there are some universal things like, we'd all love to find the light switch quickly upon entry. But also when it comes down to, technology preferences, or desk or no desk, or do we put tables and chairs, those types of things. Like we always want to be as accommodating as possible. But I heard someone say once, and I apologize, I don't remember, but if we try to design for everyone, we're designing for no one. You know what I mean? Which I think
Correct.
is really cool thing.
Well, I think that's an important thing. So this trying to make it work for everyone and designing for no one, but then, that's on one side. And then you have on the other side, it's this true listening of like, who is your target audience?
Right.
And you've said over and over, I've heard you say the word differences. I've heard you say preferences. I've heard you say listening, and just all these different factors. And how do you measure that? Which leads me into my next question, which is, so for all the different entrepreneurial endeavors you have, from development to design to your restaurant to everything to your music, how do you listen to those different types of clients? And they might not be clients in everyone. It could be a stakeholder or a shareholder. It could be your intended audience for your music. But how do you listen to those different types of audiences that you're going to?
Yeah, and it's a great question. The easiest one to answer probably is the music question. A lot of times, if I bump into somebody and I say, "Oh, how's it going?" and they tell me a really incredible story about something that they've just been through. Maybe it's a relationship story, or maybe it's, some major life catastrophe. Whenever somebody is really moved, to a super emotional place, like I almost can't help but moved by that. And so what I'll remember, the story or the thing, and I will, kind of try to interpret it through my own filter. And then kind of come out with something that, tries to do justice to the original idea or the original story. I mean, I have always felt like everybody's life could be a movie, you just have to edit it the right way. Right. So, with music, for me, it's just about finding great stories and writing songs that I'm more of a story kind of songwriter, not so much like a melody kind of songwriter. I focus more on lyrics, I would say. But yeah, so with music, I find that it's really easy for me to convert some of these really great stories into really great lyrics and songs. But with spaces, I think I start to think about like, all right, well, if I'm thinking of a specific person, why are they coming to this place? Why are they coming to this market? Why are they traveling in the first place? Is it families? Is it, single travelers? Is it business travelers? Is it social? Like you start to create a profile of like, I almost want to create like one specific customer or client that I view the project through, almost like their eyes or their lens. And I think empathy is a huge part of all of it. Being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and imagine, well, what are they going to be feeling? Where's the wow factor? And I think one of the real tricky spots of designing today is everybody seems to be designing for that Instagram moment, that photograph that they're going to post online, but not designing enough for the IRL, the in real life experience of like, well, what's it going to feel like, standing on this floor or laying in this bed? What are you going to be looking at? We had a really long conversation recently about the famous TV wall in a guest room. When you're laying in bed, looking at that wall opposite the bed, that's like the most neglected wall in all of hotel design. Because there's usually a dresser, a TV, a desk, and some artwork, and that's literally it. And so the question is like, well, when we're laying in bed in this hotel that doesn't have super great views, shouldn't that be the super great view? Like instead of making the headboard wall, the accent wall, and the focal wall, like what about when you're laying in bed, which is what 95% of the people who use this room are going to be doing? How can we make this more interesting? Because this is what everybody's going to, it's great to take a picture of cool headboards and murals behind the wall and all that, but ultimately, how's it going to feel waking up and looking at, a blank wall with a TV and a piece of art on it, versus looking at something that has a huge flower arrangement, like on this big dresser.
Yeah.
It's really going to make you go, wow, that looks beautiful.
That's super interesting because oftentimes you think about, you're designing the guest room for that first 30 seconds or 15 seconds that someone walks into the room. Oftentimes
Yeah.
they see that headboard wall. But to think about it from the person lying down and what they're looking at, if that's where they're spending most of the time, is kind of, it, it's challenging, because I also feel like in what you were saying about designing to that specific customer or client, not actually the owner,
Right.
it gets a little bit scary, because then you have to get so focused on who, and really think about who, and listening to who is going to be there. And in a way, by a hotel or a restaurant choosing the who is going to walk in, you're also leaving out a lot of other people. So how do you reconcile that?
Well, I think back to when, I don't know if you remember when W Hotels first came out, and they basically designed this super, it kind of reimagined every aspect of the hotel experience from, instead of doing this cookie cutter, standards and this and that, it was really about designing what I would call like the place where like rock stars would stay. You know what I mean? Something that was just like a little bit over the top, and even the way the rooms were named, and the suites and all that sort of thing. It was, it was thinking about it in a different way, but I think they were designing for a very young, affluent, hip crowd. And by virtue of the fact that it became so desirable for that crowd, all the other people, the baby boomers and the baby boomers, were like, I want to stay there. I want to feel like a rock star. So I think when you just follow the basic laws of supply and demand, if you create something that's desirable, even for a niche group, the fact that that group will love it so much, you'll attract other people by just virtue of demand, and we're not talking about hotels that have 400 rooms. It's not like a Vegas situation where you have 2,000 rooms in a hotel. I think the properties we're seeing being worked on and developed, they're all smaller. They're all 100 rooms and even under. And the properties we're developing are like 30 rooms, because I think what we realized is that there's way more satisfaction as operators, as designers, as owners, in being able to put more detail and more time into fewer, rooms or spaces, quality over quantity. And there's more personal satisfaction from the connections you get with that guest. And so take a place like Blackberry Farm, which I'm sure you're familiar with in Tennessee. That's widely considered the best resort hospitality experience you can have. And it's not big, and it takes forever to get a reservation, and it's super expensive. And, you'll go on a hike with a Michelin star chef, and they'll make you the most amazing meal over a campfire. But the level of care and consideration given to every detail, yeah, it's not for everybody. That's not everyone's dream vacation. But the fact that they do it so successfully, and that there's so much thought and hospitality put into every detail, makes it an experience that's attractive to almost everybody, even if it's not accessible to everybody. And so I look at that and I say, that's amazing. But I think what I want to do, my version of that, is maybe something that's similar, but more accessible, because I'm one of those people who grew up in, working middle-class household where we never went on vacation. We never went anywhere. It was considered to be more of a luxury. And I think today travel and dining out and those types of experiences are not meant to be luxuries. They're meant to be, table stakes for just living now, experiencing as much as possible. So I think, to answer your question, if you design something really, really well and do it to the best of your ability, even if it's niche, because it's done so well, it will attract a following much wider than your target demographic.
Right. And okay, so when you're doing that hotel, you're also thinking about, it's almost like a field of dreams thing, right? If you build it, they will come, right?
Exactly.
So I hear you loud and clear on that. We all hear you loud and clear on that. Now, going into the more granular, like real time, you go to Little Pren, your restaurant,
Yeah.
right? It's not an if you build it, they will come. It's built.
Yeah.
They're coming. How do you listen to those customers coming in?
Well, yeah. So Pren is a weird little thing. It doesn't really make sense on paper, like a lot of things I think that I do, but it was just the right thing at the right time and the right place. And so we built a little 30-seat restaurant. We don't have a liquor license. The idea was that we were going to be a scratch-made kitchen. So literally we make everything that we serve. So we make sauces, we make dressings, we make breads, we make biscuits, and then the ingredients that we use are all as I wouldn't say farm to table because I think that's an overused descriptor, but we have a butcher who's kind of a friend of mine, and he's a whole animal butcher who basically
Is
makes
his
all
name
of
Sal?
Sebastian. He's
No, I wish I would
he's
Sal.
actually French, and he's a French chef who used to work for Jean Georges, and he moved to the small town next to mine and opened up a really high end nose to tail butcher shop. And we're literally the only restaurant who he services because he's small, and also the amount that we pay for meat is like no restaurant would be able to support it. It's incredibly expensive, but the burgers that we sell, which are his grass-fed burgers, and he makes like custom chicken burgers for us with a special blend of different fats and herbs and different things. But he knows food inside and out, and so the fact that we have him as a partner and our restaurant, and our burgers cost $20, which for New York City doesn't seem crazy, but for the fact that we're 2 blocks from a Wendy's that sells burgers for $2, it's a bit strange for the market. But we just charge appropriately for the amount of time and the ingredients that we use. And we didn't know if people would like it, but people come in, and the space itself is designed using this kind of concept of Hygge. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's a kind of Scandinavian concept of designing for comfort and coziness. It's spelled Hygge. And so the space itself is very calming and therapeutic. And so this whole idea of opening a little restaurant that feels almost spa-like in its interior and comfy and cozy and being taken care of is fairly unique for a little town. And the town I live in is pretty small. And the fact that it's only 30 seats, sometimes we have as many people in the kitchen as we do like eating in the restaurant because everything's scratch made. And whereas a typical restaurant would probably spend, 30% of its budget on labor, we spend 60%. And we just charge more for, a comparable thing like a sandwich or a burger to reflect that. So the metrics of how we run the place are very different from a typical restaurant. But when people come in and they eat there, a lot of the times they can't even quantify why it's different. They just know it feels really good. Like we have a bunch of board games, and we have a giant Scrabble board on the wall. And, a lot of times you'll get families who come and they play Connect 4 or they play Battleship or what have you, and they sit there for hours and they have really good food, and they talk. We have a house rules board. One of the rules is no phones at the table because, again, we have this like small space and it's very distracting if you're sitting,
Is it followed?
I would say largely it is followed. Yeah. I mean, we don't really scold people if they're on their phone because we understand that, life is life. But for the most part, I will say like people actually come there because we have the no phones rule. And, they can actually sit with their kids and have a conversation about their day versus like having the kids sitting on devices and being tuned out. And so it very much is about creating a different environment and a different experience. And the food is reflective of that. But I also, yeah.
Well, but with all the new guests coming in from your community, it's not like you polled them and listened to them and then you built this. You had a vision. You heard you saw there might have been an opening or a need, and you built your vision.
Yeah.
But now you have, everyone coming in and everyone's got opinions. Has listening to the guests in your restaurant changed or modified or made you think differently about how you listen to people or think about your other endeavors?
I mean, I think with Pren, we have a really strong notion of what the brand is. And so when people give us opinions, it's only just like, well, does their opinion fit with our brand or it does not fit with our brand? Like the first house rule is be kind, right? So, the thing that we always want to convey is this sense of kindness and the sense of seeing our guests and hearing them. So if they're advocating we implement some kind of policy that is very unpren, which is an adjective we use, it's something's very pren or it's unpren. But if they're advocating we do something that doesn't feel like it fits with our house rules, then that's easy. We just like don't listen to it. Like, yeah, that's not really us. It's not for us. But if they're making a suggestion that, that kind of coincides with, the ideology of the brand, then we usually think about, okay, how can we do that better? And I think even, as from entrepreneurship, this idea of making small incremental improvements over time, all the time, the Japanese have a word for it, which is Kaizen. that is very much a part of, I think, any life, and not just business, but like trying to be a little better today than you were yesterday and trying to be a little better next week than you were this week.
Yeah.
That's something that's ever present, I think, in all of life. You never want to make the same mistakes twice. And I think that, one of the first rules about running a restaurant, which I never understand why people mess this up, but like, if you make a mistake, you have to acknowledge it, right? Like, and restaurants make mistakes all the time. Like, you get the wrong food, the food's cooked wrong. I asked for this, not this. Like, that happens literally every single day. And I think one of the things that really rings true with our customers, is that if we make a mistake, we immediately acknowledge it, we apologize, and then we try and make good for it. So depending on the gravity of the mistake, it could be like, oh, you didn't want onions and we put onions on your sandwich. Well, sorry, but like, hey, pick any dessert. It's on us, really sorry. So, but acknowledging that you've made a mistake is human and something that absolutely needs to be done in restaurants, because you've asked for A and you've gotten Q, and one of the things that's part of our house rules is that, like, if something's wrong, let us know and we'll fix it. But at the same time, we're usually the ones to catch when something's wrong. So I'll give you an example. Sometimes we have a lot of takeout, a lot of pickup orders, and somebody will come and they'll get food, and then they'll get home and they'll realize, oh, I didn't get my sandwich, or I got the wrong dessert, or what have you. We will always, we'll offer right out of the gate, like, well, where do you live? We're going to bring it to you. Now, that's a very inconvenient thing to do for us, especially if we have a busy dining room and a busy kitchen. But like, we screwed up, so we need to acknowledge that. And 9 out of 10 times they'll be like, oh, don't worry about it. Like, just, give me a credit or give me a refund or whatever. But, the idea that acknowledging, like, we made a mistake and we have to fix it,
Yep.
Is a huge, huge thing, I think, in life and especially in business. But it gives us, but just that mindset gives us a lot of leeway with our customer, because, if you look at our reviews, I think the guy at Yelp told me we're the #1 reviewed restaurant in all of Morris County specifically, but maybe even top 10 in New Jersey. Like, our customers never bash us online, which is, like, I hear from other restaurant owners, they always,
And that's all the SEO you're doing.
yeah, yeah.
Just kidding. You're not doing any of that either. Like,
No.
really,
We don't do any marketing or advertising. It's all word of mouth.
That's really impressive. So, in admitting mistakes or admitting wrong, and
Yeah.
you said it's good in life and business, but
Yeah.
I always find whenever change is necessary or there's an issue or a miscommunication, it's always important to state what the issue is,
Yeah.
but then also accept a role in it, because the other person or whatever might be doing something wrong, but also I'm at fault too, because I didn't communicate this to you in a way. So we've kind of gone that way. So thinking about that from your restaurant, then in these development deals you're doing, you have shareholders now, right? Or and investors. So how do you wind up listening to them?
Well, that's a great question. So whenever we get a new hotel design project, the first thing I always do, so you have a client who's just bought this hotel, right? And they have a list, a capital expenditure list. This is where we're spending our money. They always come to you and they've already got the budget all worked out. They've already got the scope worked out, and they're telling you this is the design scope. And I always validate it by going to TripAdvisor and reading, the 100 most recent reviews. And, if 100 most recent reviews say I had no hot water in my room, it sucks. I look at their budget and I say, well, where are you upgrading the hot water system? And they're like, oh, well, we're not doing that. Well, why not? That's what everybody's ripping you about on TripAdvisor, right? So, I think that, customers will tell you what's wrong, but if you admit that it's bad and you say, yeah, I'm trying to fix it, they're much more understanding than if you just say, oh, they're only staying here 2 nights. We don't have to upgrade, well, that's really expensive upgrading the hot water system for the building or what have you. So yeah, I think when you're going into any new deal, development or hotel design, there's all of this information online about what people think about your property or your product or what you're trying to do. And even if you're creating something new, you can look at your competitors in that space and say, like, well, what are the pain points with my competitor that I can fix in mine, right? So if you're opening a new type of hotel or a new type of residential project or a new type of restaurant, you have to say, well, who are my competitors going to be, and what do the guests of that competitor hate about that brand or they don't like about that brand? and how can I improve upon that? Because that's a point of differentiation in your business model. And I think that, people are very vocal about things that they don't like these days. And it's easy to get that information. And I think if you can do that, you can use it as an advantage and put it in the front end of the project rather than having to try to compensate it at the back end of the project, which is unfortunately what happens a lot of the times when you listen solely to the client. And I also think, we're very lucky in that we have, a really amazing roster of clients who stick with us project after project. I always tell people I'm lucky. I don't really compete for a lot of work because I just get clients who call and say, okay, we got a new one, let's go. But I think the reason being is that I think we add a lot of value to the team by asking those types of questions or not being afraid to stand up to the client and say like, yeah, I know it's important to you that we change all the chandeliers in the lobby, but also I think we need to add housekeeping closets, on each floor because everybody's saying that the housekeeping in this hotel stinks. And I bet you one of the reasons is because the housekeepers have to go 4 floors to get new linens because the only housekeeping closet is 4 floors away. And that's also a big thing too, is, it's one thing to have the client's input, but also talking to the staff at the property. Any housekeeper will tell you what they hate about the property in like 10 seconds.
Right.
And I know you've probably found that out too with Blue Canary is like, yeah, we know what the problems are.
Exactly. But, in talking about, so you're talking about the way that you've normally done business of designing on the hotel side. So you're working with an owner and you're making it happen. Also at this ILC event, I was talking to Libby Patrick.
Yeah.
And she's starting to develop her own property.
Yeah.
She said in Alabama, and she said you were an inspiration for that. And
I was so excited for her to say that. Yeah.
So in a way, you're having this impact in other ways. And so, that's your normal way of doing it. But now you're also doing your own development deals. So how are you listening to all those stakeholders as you're doing that?
I think when you're the one leading the charge, the stakeholders are kind of following your vision, right? So I think that any good designer that I know has strong opinions about how things should be, right? Because you can't be on the fence about design and want to put forward a really strong project. I think you have to be very convicted in what you believe. And I think with our development projects, one of the things that I think gives us a lot of credibility is that for 10 years, I essentially bootstrapped everything that we did. So, I lived a pretty small lifestyle and I took any extra money that I had and I, put, what they say, skin in the game, so to speak. So I had been developing out in the Poconos for 10 years, all with my own money. And when people said, well, that makes no sense, I would say, well, I did it. And here's the numbers and here's how it worked out. And everything we're doing defies the market, right? So if the average home sale in the Poconos is $150,000 for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house that's 2,000 square feet, and we build the same product and sell it for $350, like here's proof of concept. And so I think, when you're trying to raise money, everybody's always skeptical. They're looking to poke holes. But if you're willing to do it, kind of slowly and small at first with your own resources, and, you could build a piece of furniture and sell it and prove to somebody that, you have an idea for something that'll work. Like, I think a lot of people always think of the big project and how that's kind of unrealistic or difficult because it's so huge. But, if you start small and then snowball over time, and like I said, that idea of Kaizen, improving a little bit, every day, every week, every month, you start with a little tiny house or something, there's always something you can buy that you can afford. And it might be really, really crappy and it might take you 2 years to fix it up or build it. But you can always start small and prove, maybe it's just proving to yourself that you can do it at first. But that's kind of how we built up credibility, is that like, I just did stuff myself and I have a really great team. There's a guy out in the Poconos named Sean, who, if anybody knows me, they know Sean because he's like my right hand at some point. But also it's building a team of people that will go along with you on the ride. And if you have a team of people, and I have to credit my firm, because pretty much everybody who's been at my firm has been with me like since the get-go. I don't really, I'm, knock on wood, I'm lucky, I don't really have a lot of turnover. We've lost a couple of people here and there, but like even the people that we've lost, like I still talk to them regularly. And some of them are my best friends. Like, our creative director, Joe, who was with me on and off for like 10 years, like we still talk all the time. And so those relationships, so if you have a really strong team, really great relationships, and if you have a really strong vision and a perspective and you're willing to go it alone for a little while, I think it's really easy to line up those partners and get them on board, because there's very little risk involved. Because if you're willing to do it yourself without any help, and you've done that, then all you have to do is show your track record and say, hey, I've got more skin in the game than anybody, so it's really not risky for you.
But when you say, you're saying go it alone for a little while, it's more than a little while. You've been doing it for years and years and years. So don't like, you've proved your concept. Now you can look at doing bigger deals and then find investors to come along so that you can go after those.
Sure.
But as you're saying, you said a couple times, start small, bootstrap. And it's interesting. I've been having conversations. So it's about hospitality. Some people may think, oh, it's Aman or it's Four Seasons or, whatever, the Mandarin Oriental, like the best examples of hospitality. But I've been having more and more conversations with people about when all is stripped away and you're at the bare bones and it's Spartan. There is a place of peace and comfort and hearing others and this kind of Zen calm.
Yeah.
And if you remember, as you were saying, start small, it just brought me back to, I did this curated dinner, a virtual dinner through the pandemic with David Rich, his Palabra, where we were talking about navigating change and how you did it. And you surprised me because you talked about this story about when you were, I think it was just out of high school or maybe in college, you were in a van going around the country playing rock shows.
Yeah.
And you were so happy and it was so simple. Yeah. And now I see you over the course of the pandemic, you've changed your eating style, you're working out, like you're like a different human being, and there's uncomfort or discomfort in that. So tell me about how you, in those moments, you found peace and enlightenment and inspiration in that discomfort.
Yeah, I think for me, all of that revolves around mindset, right? So when you think of kids and how unencumbered they are and how free spirited they are and how much fun that they have just, with simple things like, you give a 6-year-old a cardboard box and that's like 4 hours of entertainment, making imaginary clubhouses and stuff. And I think what had happened to me was I got caught, that time when I was in a band and we were driving around in a van, I was completely unencumbered. I mean, that was amazing because I didn't have a ton of responsibility. I just had to like play that show in New Hampshire tomorrow night, and I wasn't necessarily worried about money, but I also wasn't trying to make money either. So, but then you get back into the corporate world and the business world and you start convincing yourself about things like status and salary and, title. And, you get wrapped up in these kind of things that aren't really real. And so you start taking on all this kind of adult stress. I have a friend, we call it the process of adulting, all of these things that you're supposed to have, like the big house and the fancy car and all of that sort of thing. You start getting wrapped up in this process of adulting and you start caring about, how your neighbor mows their lawn and all of these things that are really insignificant. And I think for me over the last year through the pandemic, I started kind of taking my life apart piece by piece and saying, well, what's really important? Have I prioritized myself and that like kid mentality in myself? And, how do I get back to that place of being unencumbered? And a lot of it is being present. It's being really vocal about how I feel about things. And so, you've had that client that says, I need all that work by tomorrow, end of day, and in the past I would have been like, well, I'll do my best. I'll get it to you by end of day. And now I'm just like, I'm really not comfortable promising that because I just don't think it's possible. But, I think it would be possible for next Wednesday. And so, I just try, and having kids, as is like a huge inspiration just because they're not burdened with all the things we're burdened with and they can look at problems and perspectives in a totally different way. And so just kind of taking on this kind of kid-like mentality to a lot of life and trying to be and again, what I said before about hospitality, somebody just like putting everything aside and meeting your needs in that time and place, like being 100% present. I was probably not present wherever I was at because you're checking your email, you're checking your phone every second. And, you know, once you create the expectation with somebody that you're going to respond to an email in 20 minutes, you get more emails, right? Because the quicker you respond, the more back and forth you have. And so through the pandemic, I don't know if you noticed this, but like people just weren't responding to emails in like record time. They were like getting back to you 2 days later. And it created this kind of slower flow that I still think we're living with, but I think is actually good because I think it allows people to be more present. So my own personal change in lifestyle really started with mindset and wanting to like prioritize myself more so that I could be more present and have clear head to do the things that I wanted to do. And that also allowed me to like focus in on my preferences and what I like and what I want to do. And then also, you know, now when I'm working with clients and having meetings and traveling, like I can be more present for them, which actually I think has made me better at my job. Because I'm not trying to do everything at once, like a lot of people do. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just doesn't work for me. But, you know, I think changing your mindset to being back in that van, you know,
hold on. It's funny. I want to go back to the van part, but it's funny where you say, because you can't be all those things to all those people. And I want to be present. And I think you just said like, because I'm not doing all those things. But you are, you have so many things happening, but you're able to be present with each one. And that is,
but they take a really long time. Like, let's not kid ourselves. Like, when I'm doing stuff for myself, it doesn't happen quickly at all. So like, you know, I have a client now who's taking a restaurant space and they want to be open in 6 months. Okay. That's like their goal. And I told them, I don't see it happening in 6 months. I think a year is more realistic if all the parts align. And then they're like, well, we'll push as fast as we can. We'll see what happens. But in my mind, I'm like, it's a year. You know what I mean? So, but when we opened our little 30-seat restaurant, like it took 19 months, you know, and it's tiny. Like we didn't spend a lot of money on it, you know, but like for me to open a 30-seat restaurant that would take somebody 6 weeks took me 19 months. So I subscribe more to the Einstein approach, which I don't know if you've read this thing about Einstein where, you know, everybody was crediting Einstein with being so prolific for like 5 years, where he came out with the theory of relativity and he came out with this other thing, you know, and like it was like bang, 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 bang. And, you know, and then when he did an interview, they're like, how in these 5 years were you able to be so prolific with all these theories? And he was like, I've been working on all those theories for like 25 years. They just all hit at the same time. And so I think what you're saying is similar. Like it seems like, you know, I'm so prolific, but like this hotel deal that we're closing on at the end of this month, like I've been working on this for 7 years, like, you know, because I had to figure out, you know, how do we get this done? How do we do it at a timeline that makes sense? How do we pay for it ourselves? You know, so it's like, I understand that you reach a point, I think, when things get a lot easier, when you know more and you have more resources and more support. So maybe it seems like everything is happening at the same time. But a lot of these things have taken years and years and years. And they just, have to all be landing at the same time.
You've become an overnight success after 30 years.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it seems like. Right. But I'm not trying to kid anybody and say, you know, oh, look how accomplished I am. I mean, this year is going to be the biggest year ever. We're doing 9 things. And it's like, no, those 9 things have taken 15 years. They just happen to all be hitting right now because, you know, the way the world is, I guess. But you know, and like I said, time is an ingredient, right? So everything great takes time. And so, you know, our restaurant it took us 19 months to open the first one. We've been operating now for almost 2 years. And, you know, it'll probably be another year before we do another one, which, you know, we're going to put one in the hotel we're opening in Pennsylvania. You know, and it's like, if we ever get to multiple units, it's probably going to be a decade before we have, you know, 8 or 9 of them. If we do, I don't know if we will, but you know, the thing about, there's a phrase that I like, and it's, never be afraid of things that'll take time because the time will pass anyway. Right. So you can look at yourself.
Amen to that.
10 years ago and say like, oh, you know, if I would have started then, I'd be done by now. Sure. But you didn't start 10 years ago, you know, but you could have in small steps. So
it's funny. Yeah. Someone recently just came out to like, oh my God, you're doing this podcast. You got your work, you got these other entrepreneurial things going on. Like, how do you, I've never seen anyone keep it all up there. And it's true. It's not like I just flipped a switch and did it.
Right.
It's time, and it's managing my time and keeping my calendar as a hard landscape and really being militant about how I allocate my time.
Yeah, I mean, look at like Joe Rogan or Marc Maron, who were podcasting when nobody was podcasting, right? And now they have thousands of episodes of their podcast, and they have huge endorsements and huge listener base. And you say, oh, and everyone's like, oh, I want to be Joe Rogan or Marc Maron. And it's like, well, yeah, okay, so start. You need to get at least 1,000 episodes under your belt. You know what I mean? And it's like, that's going to take time, and you're going to need people and so forth. So again, I think it's a series of, just like great projects are a series of small little details all woven together. Just that's like life. Like anything big is a series of tiny things that are woven together over time. But again, the time is the ingredient, and the commitment to the effort. And so, I always love this. There's a TED Talk. I don't know if you've seen it, about time management, where they have this like person who specializes in time management. And she talks about a week being 168 hours every week. Everybody gets the same 168 hours. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but that's, 24 times 7 is 168. And so most people have a job where they work 40 to 50 hours a week, right? Which leaves 118 hours if you work 50 hours a week. And most people sleep, I don't know, 7-8 hours a night. So that's another 56 hours. So you're left with 50 hours. What are you doing in that 50 hours? Everybody has 50 extra hours after sleep and work. The same amount of time, right? So what are you doing with it? So when people say to me like, oh, we do so much, it's like, no, I just carve up my 168 hours differently than you carve yours up. And, and there's sacrifices involved with that too. Whereas like, I don't really watch a lot of TV. Like a lot of people are, have you seen Game of Thrones? Have you seen it? Like, no, I've never seen an episode of Game of Thrones. But that's just a different choice that I make. Whereas I'll choose to like read a lot, or I'll choose to, journal or write songs or work on new recipes or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's just how I carve up my 168 hours. And I think if you start keeping a time journal, which I always encourage everybody that I meet to do, like keep a time journal for 1 week, understand where you spend your time. And it's funny because people have come back to me and it's like, I time journaled last week and I never realized I spend 5 hours a week at Target. Like, why do I do that? Or I spend, 4 hours a week. It's interacting with Starbucks in some way every week. And it's like, when you start to look at your week as 5 hours at Target, 4 hours at Starbucks, 8 hours at the supermarket, 3 hours
Diluted. It dilutes.
That, and then you ask yourself, well, why am I not where I want to be over here? How come I don't have that, that podcast yet? It's like, well, because you're spending 25 hours a week at things that are not paying you back in any way. There's no return on that investment of time. Whereas you could be investing your time in something that will return, or even that will give you self-esteem, or, the return doesn't always have to be financial. It could be emotional, becoming proficient at a skill, learning a language. Those are things that make you feel good about yourself. And again, so when I talk about the last year of like diving into self-care, I try to spend my time on things that are esteemable acts, which will also like make me feel better about, about what I'm doing and how I'm spending my time. Because so many of the things we spend our time on, specifically like social media and all of that, those are not really esteemable acts. They're more like addictions, which often lead to negative feelings and negative behavior, that you're not doing enough and that you're not, you're comparing yourself to other people.
Yeah.
And
this
so
whole idea of keeping up with the Joneses is really, it's a very difficult balance, right? And when you say, oftentimes when we look at our 50 hours, the 50 extra, what are we doing with it?
Yeah.
For instance, this podcast, it's not about, there's no ROI in it. I truly enjoy it. It's making me feel good. I'm getting to talk to people I really enjoy talking to and I'm curious about, but also I love our industry so much. And I think that there's so many little stories that we can all learn from and benefit from and kind of move the needle forward. And one of the cool things that I'm hearing is, we all have these great experiences of hospitality and terrible ones. And oftentimes those terrible experiences really inform a life path for us.
Yeah.
So when you think about looking back at all of your experiences in hospitality, not just in hotels, it's in everything, right? Because it exists everywhere.
Right.
What is like one of the worst examples of that from your life, and how did it direct you on a different path?
Like a really bad experience that made me change something? Is that what you're saying?
Change something about you, how you operate, how you listen, how you talk, whatever it is, how you design. A terrible experience of hospitality that changed your path to do things differently and make others feel comfortable.
Interesting. Great question. Wow. I think for me, it's more of accumulation of experience. So, you know, you and I both travel a lot. We're in airports all the time. One of the things that I think really affected me through all the traveling that we did and all the hotels we stay at is just, you know, the food that you eat when you're on the road, you know, airport pizza and, you know, all of the options, I would say. You know, as a culture, we like to talk about health and wellness and, you know, giving people options for health and wellness. But when you travel, it is really hard to have like good food experiences, right? And, you know, you go to any Marriott in the world, the menu's exactly the same. There's the burger, there's this Cobb salad. It's like all the same kind of generic food. None of it is really prepared with consideration. It's literally just standard. So I think for me, as somebody who like I prize travel, like being able to travel to me is always like amazing and wondrous. But then, you know, having to sit down at a meal where I know I'm making a sacrifice to have this meal because like to be there at that restaurant means I'm not all these other places that I could be. Because normally most of us are like eating on the go or grabbing something for the road or whatever. But, you know, having had just a series of bad travel food experiences, you know, I just always wonder, like, why can't somebody just care more about this? Like, why can't the menu have like 4 things on it and they're all amazing? And I've had this conversation with hoteliers and operators. And philosophically, they're like, yeah, you know, like we agree with you, we get it, but, you know, we have to have options for everybody. And I'm like, no, you don't, right? Like, so I think being able to impact the food conversations when we're developing hotels and restaurants with owners and operators specifically comes from all the bad experiences that I've had at hotels and airports and so forth, because like I'm always a fan of like, we'll do a couple of things really, really well versus trying to have like a 4-page menu where everything sucks, you know? And, you know, wanting to have a meal in a hotel at 9 o'clock at night when I've just gotten in after a 5-hour travel session. And the only option I can have is, you know, some frozen flatbread or, you know, or a burger. It's like,
Yeah.
you need to do better, dude. Like that's just, it's horrible, you know, and the only place I can eat it at is at the bar because everything else is closed. Whereas like you can have a very thoughtful room service menu that that is a really good soup, you know, like that's just homemade, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Or so, you know, and like that to me is just really irresponsible of anybody who wants to operate a hospitality business because, you know, any guest I think would rather have something amazing than something that's just phoned in and mediocre.
I totally agree.
You know, and I think that is definitely one negative experience I've had traveling that has led me to be super passionate about food and health and nutrition and opening a restaurant and wanting to accommodate people in those environments because, you know, anybody could go to the CVS and buy a microwavable burger or anybody could go to the all night drugstore and get a protein bar. Sure. Like those little marketplaces that are next to every register in a lot of the limited service motels or hotels, those drive me nuts because like, so you're saying my only food options at midnight are like Pringles and Chex Mix and candy bars and soda. Like that's literally all I can have. And that just is to me,
It doesn't set you up for a good day the next day.
no,
Yeah.
it's so unthoughtful. And again, going back to this idea of like seeing somebody and trying to be considerate and like stopping what you're doing and focusing on them, all that stuff is just so inconsiderate and cookie cutter. It's really led me to be like super passionate about trying to get my clients to think a little bit bigger and, you know, and say like, well, why can't you just have this one amazing? Because like in the restaurant business, we don't, you know, everything is not cooked to order. You don't make the soup when they order it. You make a giant pot of soup and it's either kept in a hot well or you heat it to order. But my point is like, that's also very easy for a restaurant, for a hotel to do is just have a pot of soup in the fridge. And when somebody orders it, you heat it up. Like it's not a big deal, but that's
Totally.
really amazing. Same thing with like a panini. Like how hard is it to take a pre-made sandwich and throw it in a panini press and deliver somebody like a crunchy, crusty sandwich with a little side of soup? That's amazing, right? But like, you know, I mean, I think DoubleTree did a good thing with that warm cookie. You know, they have that cookie warmer. People really look for those cookies, right? I mean,
it's funny. My friend, I interviewed my friend Lauren from Sweet Lauren's, and I want DoubleTree to take on her cookies because it's vegan and gluten free. So
Her cookies are delicious.
they are awesome.
Yeah.
But imagine all the people that can't eat that cookie. I love
Right.
cookies.
Yeah.
I can eat that DoubleTree cookie, but I don't know how many people are gluten free or vegan or whatever. And
They have nuts in them too. Like the cookies have nuts in them. So yeah, but I feel like if, from the brand perspective, if they were gluten free, vegan, nut free, they'd probably have to give out way more of them. So they'd be like, well, there's a lot of people that won't eat the cookie because it has nuts. So that like prevents us from giving away too many, sort of thing. So, but yeah, I agree with you. But that again is that idea of consistent improvement, right? So if everybody loves the DoubleTree cookie, but half the customers won't eat it, you have to say, well, how can we make more people eat it? Oh, we're going to switch to this brand that's like more accessible and more,
Well, moving from that, when you think about the future, what's keeping you up at night right now?
I mean, I think what's keeping me up is just the collective emotional state of everybody I run into, and just how stressful the world is right now. And, from your end of it, you could use words like supply chain and logistics, but from my side of it, it's just, people are afraid of a variety of things from, health and financial security and emotional wellness. And, I think, the fact that I've tried to be a little bit more mindful has made me a little bit more aware of, what everybody else is going through. And so I just, when you read the news or the media or you go online or social, you see a lot of just like negativity and things like that. And I want to try and figure out a way for collectively to everybody get past, all of the differences and just, have a kind of carefree attitude and say, you do what's good for you. And I'm fine with that, and not have everybody jumping everybody over time. But
you do you and I'll do me.
yeah, I mean, it's a big issue in our hospitality world because, think about how, designing a bathroom should be pretty simple, right? But now it's like, well, is it all gender neutral? Is it male and men and women and then all genders? And, what do I need to put in the all gender one versus the men one? Is it okay to put this in the women's one? The men, it's like, these are conversations that we're having that tie directly back to cultural issues that also tie into, mental wellness and so forth. Does a transgender person feel comfortable going into a men's room or a women's room? And will somebody give them a second look if they identify as one, and you're not supposed to be in here and all that sort of thing. So these cultural issues that affect our mental wellness, like, I spent a lot of time thinking about like, well, what's the solution? How can we make everything as inclusive as possible? Because inclusivity is a huge thing, part of hospitality. When I say inclusivity, a lot of people immediately are triggered into thinking of like a cultural buzzword, but literally inclusivity is like the backbone of hospitality, making somebody feel welcome. That's inclusivity, right?
Agreed. And if you look at us and, America, our diversity and our inclusivity is our strong suit. And somehow it's gotten, there's always been polarization, but it just seems more polarized now. And I believe that our inclusivity, diversity is really our strength.
Yeah.
And we need to bring that out more.
Yeah. But
embrace that.
There's a huge, as you've seen, a big pushback on wanting to make things more inclusive, which I don't really understand because, as far as I knew when I was growing up, I was told the country was a melting pot, right? And so it's like everybody all together, all different types, shapes, sizes, colors. And somehow we've started to proliferate all the differences and, well, this person is different, that person is different. And now we need to have a policy just for that person. It's like, no, like when the ADA Act was passed about accessible design, the thesis is that if you design for accessibility, literally anybody can use it. We're not really calling out the person who needs it. We're just saying this works for everybody, universal design. And I think that the same needs to be true for any new, movement or any cultural thing that's happening. Is like, we need to find a way to design where it's just universal and nobody feels different for using this that way. And I've fought with people on this, like, why don't we just, instead of having a men's room and a women's room, if the code says we need 10 toilets, let's have 10 individual, anybody can use a restrooms, and that's easy. And and they say, well, that's going to be more expensive. I'm like, yeah, but you're renovating, you're making it so that it's good for forever. Like, nobody in the future will ever have to spend money on this again. But if you make it gendered, you're basically passing the bill for somebody in the future to have to do it, and you're not really creating value. You could be a leader in this space. Let's be the first hotel in the market to have all, neutral bathrooms, so sometimes you have to argue for progress, but really it's about universal accessibility and inclusion. And you're saying, well, let's not
universal comfort.
Yeah, universal
right?
comfort. And I think that also gives somebody who might have anxiety or be nervous about going into a restroom,
It takes it away.
it takes it away. And isn't that the point of hospitality, is to like put that person at ease and, make
Yes.
them comfortable, right? So,
It's like, why even have that difficult decision where it's like, it's a stressful decision moment. So I hear you on where we are now, but as you look forward, and I know you're always so very optimistic, but what's exciting you most about the future, Kraig?
I think I'm excited by what I call kind of invisible technology, things that just work without you having to think about them. I think technology is a really great thing, but I think we often make too much about making it showy and visible and big. And I love like invisible technology that just works. So for example, like, when you fly, you get your ticket on your phone, your boarding pass on your phone, you just swipe as you go. You can, literally, I don't know about you, but I'm one of these people that turns up at the airport like 10 minutes before my flight leaves. And I walk through Clear and I walk through TSA and I get on it, and people are just like, I could never do that. Like, but I can only do that because of technology, right? Like it scans my retinas and it says, go right on in. And, I'm familiar enough with not having stuff in my bag that slows me up, and I know where all the gates are, and I can just, breeze right through like that. That kind of simplicity really excites me. And how can we make, like the hotel check-in process that seamless? Like I've heard tell about brands that are making it, you can go right to your room. I've never experienced it personally, but
I want to try that. I don't know where that is.
I've heard brands, tout about it, but I've never actually experienced it. But like let's say, for example, you have a 30-room hotel and who all your guests are coming. Before they turn up, you tell them, well, you're going to be in room 28. And, and then they go in the room and they have filled out through your app a series of preferences of what they like. I like it this temperature. I like, these are my favorite snacks. These are my favorite drinks. And, it's just this little thing. And then they come and it's completely customized and curated for them because they answered 8 questions on an app. It's just totally invisible, but immediately they feel at home.
I love that.
Yeah, I know. And that's,
but you know what? Much in the same way when you were talking about the robots before, it kind of freaks me out too. Like I like that collision with the other human.
No, sure. But you can choose that. So you could say like, I want to check in at a desk. I want to talk to the, or I want to go right to my room. It's really about your preferences, not a universe. You know what I mean? Like universally, you're giving people the choice, but people are going to make different choices. And, you're doing it to the point where it's consensual. So they're agreeing to give you their preference for their favorite drink or their favorite snack. But like, if I'm, for example, a health conscious traveler who really likes homemade granola, and it's, if there's a question, is what's the one thing we could put in your room that would immediately like, make you feel like we get you or whatever. And if I say like homemade granola, and it's just like, with online, you can literally order anything, or you can even have choices that will speak to different people. But the point being is that the technology is there to allow you to learn more about your customer in any business, not just hotels, but to the point where you can just go, it's not even the extra mile. It's like the extra 20 feet,
Totally.
Just to differentiate yourself between the kind of cold check-in experience that a lot of other.
Well, it goes back to how do we listen to others and how can we get ahead of that so that we can anticipate? Now, how old were you when you went on the road trip? With
I was in my late 20s. I was in a band in my late 20s, and it was like right after 9/11. And I had like a big corporate job at a big firm, and my band was just like, let's just go on tour. And I was just like, yeah. So I quit my job.
Okay,
and I bought a van, and we drove around for a year.
So my question is, if you go back to just before you start that van,
right,
that van trip with your band,
yeah,
knowing everything you know now, what advice do you give yourself?
Don't take everything too seriously. I think taking life too seriously is one of the big problems of being human. We tend to give a lot of gravity to things that are insignificant. Somebody recently told me they have this thing called the 5 and 5 rule. If it's not going to matter in 5 years, don't spend 5 minutes thinking about it. And that's like a good litmus test for when you're, stressed about something.
It's also that idea of adultifying, or what did you call it?
Adulting. Yeah, it's adulting. It's the process of adulting is being stressed,
De-adult. Hashtag de-adult.
Well, yeah, unlearn. You have to unlearn a lot of adult behavior.
Unshackle.
Because the truth is nobody really knows what they're doing. I think that's one of the other things that I've learned. You talk to really successful people and they're just going by their gut a lot. They're winging it. And you think like, oh, Elon Musk must have it all figured out. And then you're like, no, he doesn't. It's just, it's just winging it. Right. So
totally.
But the way in which he's winging it is somehow inspiration to other people who want to be him and all that sort of thing. So
absolutely.
Nobody's got it figured out. And I think that that's like, it's important to just have that perspective. And so like, if you could choose to be, de-stressed and kid-like and approach everything with enthusiasm and fun versus like being stressed and worrying about it. And again, it's all about communication. So if you go into a room and you feel like you don't know anything, and all these people are smarter than you and they're going to think I'm stupid because they have more experience, just start asking questions. And, if somebody mentions an acronym you've never heard, just say, hey, what is that acronym, or whatever. Cause like I'm constantly finding people are using acronyms more and more these days. And it might be a conference, it might be, a management technique or whatever. And it's like, well, I don't know that. So, and I think it's funny because when you start being vulnerable in that way and saying like, I don't know what that is, can you explain it? Somehow in this weird twist, it almost endears them more to you than them thinking you're ignorant. You know what I mean? The fact you spoke up and you said, I don't know what that is.
You're human.
You're human and people like you. You know what I mean? They like you more. So,
Kraig, I like you. I like you a lot. And I want more people to like you. So where can people connect with you? How do they get you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm lucky I have a kind of unique last name. So, on Instagram, it's just my last name is Kalashian. And then I think the design firm is Kalashian_design on Instagram. Or our website is kalashian.com and you can email any of us through there as well.
And it's with a K. Kraig with a K.
KALASHIAN.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then how about Pocono Modern?
Oh yeah. So Pocono Modern is just exactly as it sounds. The Poconos are a mountain region in Northeast PA. It's POCONO, Pocono. And then Pren, which has arguably the most successful social channels out there because we post a lot of food pictures and recipes. Pren is just PREN, Pren Kitchen at Instagram or prenkitchen.com.
Awesome.
And then we'll be launching the hotel website soon as we work to complete our first cool alt kind of resort in the Poconos, which will be coming later this year, early next year. And I'm sure you and I'll be talking more about that in the near future too, because I'd love to have you involved in some way. But
I definitely want to be. And I just want to say, Kraig, thank you so much for being a guest.
No, thanks for having me, Dad. It's been a real pleasure.
Awesome. And also thank you to our listeners. Speaking with Kraig, it's made me think differently about hospitality. If it made you think differently, please share the podcast with someone else that may benefit. And thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time.